Hello, and welcome to our virtual annual discipline meeting for the 2022-2023 school year. For those of you who may not know me, I'm Dane Lamont, the School Partnership Specialist for Penn Highlands Dual Enrollment Program. As we continue to adapt to a post-pandemic environment and adjust to new educational hurdles, we are pleased that we can provide you with an opportunity to complete our NACEP required activities in a platform where you can still make a connection to your liaison. Throughout the semester, ACE Liaison scheduled live Zoom sessions to discuss specific topics related to the disciplines in which you teach. While we understand that it is not always possible for you to attend these live sessions, these sessions were recorded so you can get the benefit of the event with the discussion from those who attended. Please enjoy the recording of your annual discipline-specific activity. We hope next school year we will be able to welcome you back to our campus for an in-person event. Thank you for your continued hard work in making this program available to students.
Right, pin it to me. There we go. Awesome. Okay, well, welcome to you all, everyone who's joining me this evening for our ACE annual discipline meeting here. I'm new to this. My name is Matthew Stumpf. You may all have known Janine before. She's done this in the past, but this is my first year as the ACE liaison, and I'm enjoying it so far, and I'm glad I get to converse with a few of you this evening about college level grading practices and the concepts of writing across the curriculum. And I'm going to admit another person here. Along with talking about college level grading practices and WAC tonight, I also am going to touch a little bit on assessment and talk a little bit about that here and to give you all some ideas of how that works and just some general overview of what the purpose of it is and how it's going to function. But mostly tonight, I just want to kind of give you all a refresher at this point and go over some of the things that I think a lot of you have probably already heard, and some of you that have been in this program for a long time have probably gone over this before, but it's always good to get a refresher on this stuff, right? Even putting this together myself over the past couple of days, I really was rethinking my own grading practices in a number of ways, and I think that's something we should always be working on, especially as English instructors and people who are in charge of grading writing, which is often a difficult task, is to always sort of be conscious of our practices and how we're using them to ultimately aid our students and make them better writers in the long run. And then I also wanted to talk on writing across the curriculum tonight, because I don't know about many of you, but I've seen a lot, it's coming up in conversations again. It was really big before and it sort of fell off, and now it's coming up in conversations again, at least in the circles that I'm in. And I'm seeing it presented a little bit differently now than it once was in the past. And I want to talk tonight about some of the challenges with writing across the curriculum, and then some of the ways that we as English instructors can help work through some of those challenges. And I also want to hear some feedback from you all tonight who are in attendance, to hear some things about what you're thinking about the classes you're teaching, and some maybe things we should be looking for as far as assessment as we move forward with the ACE program. But again, my name is Matthew Stumpf, and we can go ahead and get started here tonight. So, agenda. I already went over this a little bit with you all, but first I want to go ahead and introduce this to us tonight and talk about some of the reasoning for why I want to talk about the things I want to talk about. Then I want to go over sort of the goals of our session here tonight. And then we're going to talk about college level grading, and I'm going to go over it in some detail, but I'm not going to go over it in excruciating of detail as I could. I'm going to pause on some slides and just let you all read what's on there, because I think reading it out loud to you is ultimately just going to not serve the purpose that I'd like it to, because there's a lot of detail I have in this college level grading section that I think is important, and I think that we should all consider, but I know that we are all literate and I don't need to read it out loud to you. And in fact, oftentimes I notice that with PowerPoints, if you read it out loud to them, it becomes the redundancy effect, right? And you end up not remembering anything. So I will let you digest some of that on your own as we get to it. I'm going to talk a little bit about assessment. And like I said, writing across the curriculum. Then we'll summarize all of this as well then to sort of give it some conclusion, and then open it up for any questions from all of you if anybody has any comments or questions they'd like to air at the end of this today. So, introduction, right? College is a new adventure for our students, right? And I think we often primarily think of this adventure as a physical one, but if we look deeper, we can see that these students are entering a whole new world with the work they do, right? I often see in my students like deer in headlights type of look, right? When they enter into a college classroom for the first time and they see what's expected of them, they see what the rigor is going to be like. They're entering a whole new phase of their work academically, and I think just overall as people growing up to be adults at that point. So in college, academic rigor and the transfer of knowledge are things expected of students, right? We just expect them to sort of have an understanding that this is going to be a rigorous type of schooling, and we expect you to be able to use this knowledge elsewhere, right? That you should be able to apply this, extend it beyond just the writing classroom, right? And so these are things expected of students, but what is our role within this as writing instructors, right? How can we help with this? And how can we help ensure that we have enough rigor and enough ability for them to transfer this knowledge to other applications outside of just a writing classroom, right? And then what's the difference between grading and assessment, right? It's always a question that I think I have to refresh myself on the difference pretty much yearly, and just trying to understand how they differ in the nuanced ways that they are slightly different. But we'll talk about that for a little bit here today as well. So our primary goals of this discussion, I want to review college level grading practices for rigor, develop a deeper understanding of our own grading practices, refresh our awareness about that role of assessment, and then again, investigate the impact of writing across the curriculum. So to get started here, just sort of an overview, and then we're going to break each of these down in detail. But again, I'm not going to go through all of that excruciatingly with you because we've had long days today and we need to get through this. So first of all, let's even start from the back end and go up to the A. I think it might be easier in that regard to look at this. So these are sort of adapted from some of the literature I found here at Penn Highlands on grading criteria, and through some of my own practices and my own schooling, I came up with these sort of examples of what these should look like. And for an F, we're talking about an essay with no discernible thesis, right? We have an essay that we can't really tell what the point is. We don't necessarily know why it's even on the page, right? It's unclear in thought and expression. It might even at this point seem like it's overly rushed, or the student didn't put enough effort into it, right? And there's also, I like to reserve F as not just for essays like this, but this is also, we're talking about essays that break classroom policy, like plagiarism at this point. I'm sure we've all run into that enough times over our teaching careers, that we reserve an F for those sort of situations. We reserve an F for if they didn't meet the criteria of the assignment, right? But essentially, we're talking here an essay that has no discernible reason. There's almost no reason for it to even be on the page, right? You can't really tell whenever you look at it. For a D, we're talking it's got a flimsy thesis, right? They're not taking a stance here. And this is something that I find students struggle with, and we'll talk about some more here later on, is taking a firm position. I find that they almost would rather be wishy-washy and flimsy as opposed to taking that firm position. I think maybe for fear of it being a wrong position, perhaps. But when we look at a D essay, we've got that flimsiness, that wishy-washiness in its thesis, right? And it's got poor overall organization. And for a C essay, we're talking that the central idea, for an essay with a central idea, though its development tends to be vague and generalized, right? We know why this is there, right? We've got a central idea, we've got a little bit of organization now, we can tell that there's a point for this essay to be written, but it lacks in development, right? And it's vague, it's using generalizations way too much in this. They're not actually explaining or giving description or detail where it needs to be. And then for a B essay, right, this is an essay that develops an interesting point, has most of the virtues of an A essay, but more about competence than originality is what I like to think about for a B essay, right? They've achieved the assignment, right? I think this is where I like to talk about sort of, for lack of a better way of phrasing it, almost like the bastardization of the A, where we've started to give in a lot of circles, and I know this is a good refresher, especially after COVID and with a lot of the way that grading has become a little more lenient, because we as teachers had to juggle a lot throughout that entire time. And we had to understand that people have a lot going on. But I think we need to get back to this point where a B is about, you did it. Like a B is a good grade. A B means they accomplished the goals of the assignment. They did everything they needed to do. It was a competent essay that they turned in. And an A then goes above and beyond those basic requirements, right? The writer in some way develops an original thought in an A essay, right? We're talking for A's that they go beyond just what's on your assignment sheet or on your rubric, right? That they are going a little bit further in one way or another. You can tell that the student put in that little bit of extra work. Maybe their cover page is a little more creative. Even I've seen that as a way to sort of take it over the top. Maybe that idea is something that you, even as a teacher, are reading it and going, oh, that's interesting, right? As you, as a college level intellectual, are looking at that and going, this is actually an original thought, right? And so when we're talking about academic rigor and we're talking about college level grading criteria, we really want that A to be reserved for the above and beyond. And this is where I'm saying too, that putting this together made me start to really evaluate my own grading practices over the past couple of years and start to look at how I've been probably a little willy-nilly with A's more so than I should be. And I think that's okay, as long as we can start recognizing that, right? And understanding that for our discipline to be considered academically rigorous as it should be, we need to maintain that level there where that A is something that goes above and beyond. So I want to then break these down a little bit, right? And sort of look at these individual areas at what an A essay, what some qualities of that might look like, what some qualities of a B essay might look like, C, D, and so forth here. Like I said, I won't go through all of these in excruciating detail, but I will pause on some of these slides just to give you a chance to look through them and get an idea of at least what some standards should be. And you can incorporate these standards into your own grading practices as you see fit. I will also note that I tried to make these as applicable as possible across the various courses that you all may be teaching. I know that we have people in the ACE program teaching 110, Composition 1. We've got people teaching Comp 2, the Studies in Literature. We've got, I think there's a couple out there teaching the research writing class. And I know there's at least one teaching creative writing even as well. So we've got it all across the board here of the types of work that the students will be completing for these classes. So I tried to make these applicable to almost all of those situations. So if they seem a little vague, it's because I was purposefully being a bit vague in trying to make it something that could work no matter the essay type. So the A essay, right? And I broke these down into a few areas, right? We have content and research, we have organization, style, and mechanics, and right. And I'll go back on these here and go over some of them. And I think these are sort of the areas that all of us look at, right, in various ways. You might call them different things in your syllabus or your rubric, but we look for these areas. These are pretty common things that we as English instructors will be looking for in our student essays. So as we said about an A, right, it goes above and beyond the basic requirements for the assignment and it develops an original thought. Right, this is an essay that consistently engages the interest of intelligent, sophisticated college level readers, is what I really like to think about an A essay. It's the one that as a college level reader, you can look at that and go, this is interesting. Like, this is actually cool what they're writing about, right? And we've all experienced that, I'm sure, right? You get that essay from a student and like you end up just reading it without even grading it, right? Because you get so invested in it just as a college level reader that you're like, oh, wow, that was actually really well done. And those are the A essays, right? Almost 90% of the time, those are going to be the essays that are going to get that A grade, right? Because they actually engage you as a college level reader. And you can think about that, whether or not they're engaging their audience within that. And an A essay should be a college level audience. It effectively addresses and engages those likely audiences, like I said. Moving through these, I don't want to cover all of them. Like, again, I know that you all can read, so you can look through these on your own. But the essay clearly demonstrates the writer's information literacy and ability to use college-level academic research as a significant means to develop complex ideas. I think this is the key point here, too, about an A essay. It's that not that they're just bringing in other information, they're actually synthesizing it, right? And I do lessons in Composition 1 and in Composition 2 on synthesis, and I think it's one of the things students struggle with tremendously, learning how to fuse their own voice with the voice of others. And an A essay starts to do that, right? They're actually getting to that level of synthesis with their content and their research, right? And it's clearly demonstrating their ability to introduce and integrate material from outside of themselves, right? This is where they're starting to bring in examples. They're starting to describe in further detail, right, within their content and their research of an A essay. We're really talking here about one that goes above and beyond in these areas. So I don't want to talk anymore about these. So that's content, right? When we're talking about an A essay and we talk about content, we can look at these pointers here. As far as the organization of an ASA, right? So an organization of an ASA is one that leads you through it, right? That the paragraphs are purposefully organized. You can tell that the person put some thought into the reason the way they organized these paragraphs the way they did, right? They break it into parts that contribute to a greater understanding of the whole in their organization, right? And I really like the second from last point on here, that the essay leads the readers through the order of discussion. This is something that I talk about really early on in a lot of my composition classes, where I'd like to tell students that a good writer takes your reader's hand and pulls them through to the end, right? You will hook them in that beginning, and you will grab a hold of them and you will pull them along. And there should be no speed bumps, right? There should be no like forks in the road. They should clearly be able to tell what direction you're taking them down, right? Is a well-organized essay, right? And I think this is something that I often also see first-year writers especially struggling with, because they seem to assume that their readers are going to know things, which they will, but they assume sort of the wrong things oftentimes, and they will just sort of slap something down on the page and expect you to be the reader to make the connection. When I tell them, no, you need to make that connection for them. Like, use that transition, use that, be explicit, be clear, be purposeful in letting them know why you're telling them this, right? So that you are grabbing their hand and keeping them on that path, right? You're pulling them along with you. And then lastly, about organization here, I do want to mention about the closing sections that give a reader a satisfied sense. I don't know about the rest of you, but I've noticed recently, and maybe not so recently, but I just overall, that students tend to struggle with conclusions. And I have my own hypothesis on this, and it's essentially that I think students don't read anything to the end, so they don't know what a conclusion actually looks like. But that's just a hypothesis. I don't have it proven yet. But I find that I need to spend time teaching them how to actually give this satisfied sense of closing, like that they actually have a summary statement in there. They reword their thesis in some way, right? That they actually give us some sense of like fulfillment at the end of that essay. And I see students struggling with that a lot, that you'll just have sort of one sentence conclusions, or you'll have these conclusions that are a new idea that are being brought in that don't actually give us that satisfaction of feeling like we're done, like there's actually a conclusion to be had here. So an ASA gives you that satisfaction, right? You get down to that conclusion and you can tell, oh yeah, like now that's a great recap. I can breathe, like I can keep moving on with this essay. Style, right? Style is big for an A-level essay, right? An A-level essay has some precise word choice, right? That's interesting. Again, it's something that can actually grab your attention as a reader. It's mature, right? It's purposefully controlled. I often see that students will sort of, good essays, ones that I will admit I've probably given A's to, often they'll sort of weave back and forth between sort of mature, professional, purposefully controlled language and a little bit of conversational language in there, right? That should probably be a B, right, in my eyes at that point, whenever they're doing that. Because an ASA has that mature language throughout it, right? That the sentences are clear, they're logical, they're easily understood by a college-level reader. They make active statements, right? They're writing in the active voice throughout this. The sentence structure is going to vary according to the content and purpose of the audience, right? And the information and quotations from sources are integrated skillfully into their own sentences and paragraphs here. And then lastly, mechanics, right? For an ASA, when we talk about mechanics, we're talking about that their format is consistent. I don't know for many of you, but I know, especially in my Comp 2 and my research writing classes, I've seen some students who sort of hop back and forth between MLA and APA, right? They'll in-text citations will be in MLA, but then they'll have references on the bottom, and then they'll have the actual citations under reference will actually be correct APA, right? But then the next citation is MLA, and you're like, what is happening here? And I'm not sure what's happening there, but it's where they're not being consistent with these applicable style guides, right? They're not actually keeping that good throughout the essay. The problems in grammar, spelling, and punctuation and usage do not interfere with the communication is something that I like to look at for an ASA. Right? There might be one or two problems in there, and I actually tend to keep a formula in order to try to figure out how much points ought to take off from students for grammar. But I don't know about a lot of you, and I don't know, maybe it's slightly different in the high school setting, but I've noticed that a lot of students are using the software available to them, like Grammarly and things. And I don't know how I feel about that. As an English instructor, I'm a little bit on the fence about it, but I've noticed that problems with grammar have kind of gone down, at least for my end. But then I worry that if they don't have that tool in the future, are they actually going to be able to write with the precision that they should be able to? So I know personally, I always have my students do an in-class essay in Composition 1, where I make them write without the aid of those tools. One, because I want to see it, and two, because I want them to experience what it is like if they don't have those tools, right? If they don't have Grammarly available to them to fix their grammar, if they have to actually spell things without spell check, and so on and so forth. So we actually do an in-class essay in my course, my composition classes, that allows me to sort of see some of this in its rawest form. Also with mechanics, that the editing, that it shows they actually edited it, right? That it shows effective attention to the desires of their readers, right? So that's an A essay overall, right? Again, that it goes above and beyond when we're talking here about an A, that it achieves the purposes of that assignment, but then it does some more. So I don't want to talk through all of these, but I will just sort of slowly work my way through some of these and point out some of the differences, right? And I want to at least stop and focus on maybe the C, but I don't think we need to talk about a B, because a B essay, as I said, just has a lot of the same virtues of an A, right? We're talking about a really good piece of writing still, but you can see some of the differences here, right? If you go down, second from last point I have on this one, where the essay demonstrates the writer's ability to use college level academic research clearly and purposely to develop the writer's thesis, right? But they aren't integrating it as well, right? It isn't necessarily synthesis at this point. They aren't fusing their own words and the other one, but they're still able to bring in that academic research to clearly and purposely develop their thesis, right? It still maintains a consistent focus for a B essay. It clearly addresses the expectations of their audience, and it accomplishes, or attempts to accomplish, to make strong attempts to accomplish challenging purposes, right? Whereas the A essay would achieve those challenging purposes slightly. That's in content and research. I'll just give you just another second to look at those if you'd like. Then organization for a B essay, again, not all that much different from an A, that your readers can still identify the focus of the paper and follow it, right? But they might not be guided along as easily, like as well, right? They might not be, might not feel as if they have that person holding their hand pulling them through the essay, but they can still make it through, right? There's still a path, right? There's still a beaten path for them to follow at this point. Your readers of a B essay can still identify how the order in which the information appears supports the focus of the paper, right? There's transitions between and within the paragraphs that advance their ideas, but maybe they're not perfect in this instance, right? And then that closing section is still pretty good, right? They still have a conclusion that gives you a sense of it ending, but it might not give you as much resolution and fulfillment as a good A conclusion might. That's organization for a B essay. Style, again, just slight differences here. They're only occasionally choppy or rambling or repetitive for a B essay, right? The voice of the essay is consistent. The information and quotations from sources make sense within the writer's own sentences and paragraphs, right? Like they support what they're saying. They make sense why they're bringing this information in. It might not be artfully integrated, but you can tell that it supports the point that they're trying to make. Oh, sorry, I wanted to give you a second to look at the style before I hopped ahead again. For mechanics, again, we're still following a style guide here at this point. The references to outside materials are cited and documented carefully enough that you know, right? There's no plagiarism here. They made a careful and conscious effort to integrate those and cite them properly. They maybe made a little bit of a mistake here or there. There might be a period in the wrong place, but they actually referenced the stuff. The mistakes in grammar, spelling, punctuation, or usage rarely interfere with the ability to actually communicate their point, right? And they actually did edit it, and it shows attention to the desire of readers to read without being interrupted by unexpected errors. I will digress for a second here and note that I find it important in composition classes, especially when we're talking about sort of the differences between a B and an A essay, to talk to my students about editing and revising and sort of what it actually means to edit and revise, right? When we talk editing, we're talking about correctness, right? We're talking about actually making sure the sentence is grammatically and punctuated correctly. But when we talk about revision, we're talking about understanding, right? When you talk about revision, you talk more about understanding and bigger picture. You're talking about actual focus of the sentences. You're talking sentence level understanding versus paragraph understanding, and then revision can go as big as let's revise the whole essay, right? So I often will hear students just talk about, well, I revised this, and I'll be like, well, did you? Or like, did you actually like proofread this and edit this and revise this in those ways that I'm talking about? Or are you just using the couple buzzwords you've heard people say in your past whenever they say edit and revise, and the students will just sort of parrot that back sometimes. So I really think it's imperative to, especially to let them know that oftentimes the difference between a B essay and an A essay is strong editing, right? That you went back through and made sure it was correct. There were no communication errors in there. There were no grammar errors in there at this point, right? So that they know that that's something that can take them to that going above and beyond next level. But again, I digress on that just because editing popped up there. Then that was the end of the BSA. Then we have the CSA, and again, I don't want to go through all of these, and I know that I'm a broken record here, but I think it's important to really define what we mean by these different layers of an A essay, a B essay, a C, a D, an F, and actually have some concrete ideas of what that means. And I share these with my students. This exact list I will actually share with my students in a lot of way in composition. And I don't share it in 205, but I do share it in 200 as well with students. But I find it especially effective in a first year writing class to let them know what these look like give them some actual solid definitions of what these different layers look like. And that can also help us avoid any problems down the line where you may have a student who thinks that you just gave them a poor grade on an essay because you didn't like them, which I've dealt with that in my past as a teacher, where I've had students complain about that, and I've had to back it up with these requirements like this. So I think looking at these as just, again, a refresher for us as teachers to have an idea of what we should be doing as grading, but it also allows us to have some backing and some vocabulary and some understanding of sort of what we need to do if challenged on this, perhaps, if God forbid that does happen to one of us. So again, a CSA, I think I've left it on the content and research section for the C long enough that I think most would be able to look through this. But again, this is one that has a central idea, though its development tends to be vague, right? You're still got a little bit of generalization going on in a CSA. But they develop a focus, but they have details, examples. They include graphics when useful, but it's not necessarily hitting all of those points, right? It presents ideas and descriptions with readers in mind, but they might not have a particular audience picked here. They don't really know their audience all that well, perhaps, at this point. The organization, right? The titles and openings generally match the topic and focus. The paragraphs make sense. Essay generally establishes an overall organization, develops a basic focus. The transitions from one section and idea to another are evident and make sense, but they're not working that well in this moment, right? So a CSA can still be fairly well organized. Talking style, right? Most words appear to be well chosen. We're not talking precise here anymore, right? Some of the sentences, you're talking short and choppy here. They get vague, wordy, but they're generally readable, right? That you can understand them. They sometimes feature the efficient and effective use of modifying clauses and phrases, but not always. And the information in quoted language from sources is still, you can tell it's source material, right? It's still quoted. It's not plagiarized at this point, even if it might not be accidental, even if it might be accidental plagiarism. At this point, you can tell they purposefully presented it as language from a piece of source material still in a CSA. And then mechanics, right? Their format choices are generally appropriate. References to outside sources are generally cited. Editing shows adequate attention, but there's mistakes in grammar and punctuation where they usually do not generally interfere with either the writer's credibility or our ability to read the text. We're getting close here, though, right? It's starting to interfere slightly with their credibility and our ability to read at this stage. and then a D essay. Right? And again, we can just glance at these quickly here. And we're talking that we're sort of lacking a single focus. We have no real clear purpose for these ones. The ideas are stated, but they're not developed. Like we just have, this is this because it's this, and it's that because it's that, right? And they don't actually develop that with details and exemplification and any discussion about that. They just sort of slap it on the page, right? A DSA. Shows weak research and information literacy skills. The sources do not support or may even contradict the views that the writer attributes to them in a DSA. You may have, these are the ones, I often think of a DSA as the ones that I read and I go, I don't know about that. When you read one of their topic sentences or something that they're trying to use in support here, and you are sort of like, I don't know how that works. You might want to rethink that slightly. Is often where I'll think about, at least this content and research of a DSA. Organization, again, paragraphs do not develop logically from start to finish, right? In this one, I think we've all seen a DSA before, right? And seen what we're talking about here. It does not establish those patterns, right? There's no real transitions. They're weak, ineffective, or misleading. Something along the lines of, in conclusion, in their like third paragraph, right? And you're not yet at their final paragraph, and so you have a misleading transition here, telling them where they're heading in this instance. Style, we're talking short and choppy. These I often like to think of a DSA also as far as style. It looks like text messaging in a lot of ways, that they're disordered, they're poor phrasing, their sentences disregard the normal rules of standard written English. Again, it's a text message essay, and I think we've probably seen this. At least I think most of us have probably seen an essay of this variety that has that kind of language within it, right? It's difficult to read, and it's difficult to even sometimes grade these and give them the kind of insight that they need in order to improve on these. These are the ones that take some difficulty with these sort of things. Style, and then mechanics, right? We have the format, including any graphics. It's careless, disregards the basic requirements of applicable style guide. There's many errors in spelling, grammar, punctuation, word choice, the usage. It makes it difficult to read at this point with the mechanics. Instances of misused source material show careless inattention to important requirements for quoting, paraphrasing, citing, and you may raise questions here of possible plagiarism. It might be accidental at this stage, right? They maybe didn't completely copy an essay from the internet and turn it in as their own, which I've had happen this semester already, but they may have just had some plagiarism in there. It might be accidental. You might just have to have a conversation with them, or maybe they have to have a conversation with another teacher or a librarian or somebody else that can help them with that. But this isn't egregious plagiarism in a DSA, right? And then lastly, the F. I only have one slide for this because we've been here, right? This is no discernible thesis, unclear in thought. The F grade's often reserved for these following circumstances too, at least in my practice, that the student did not turn in an essay by the due date set by the instructor syllabus or by the end of whatever grace period you allow. Right? I typically allow, I think I have a pretty lenient grace period actually. I allow 10 days post due date for them to get stuff turned in, and unless they've talked with me and we've have some extenuating circumstances we've developed, they get that kind of grace period. F is for an essay that did not accomplish the goals of the assignment, right? You have no idea why it exists. It has no discernible purpose. It displays a lack of understanding of college level diction at this stage, right? Or it's a student that violated policies set by the school or the instructor syllabus, right? For example, a plagiarism policy. If that information is made clear that a violation would result in the grade of an F. And I know here at Penn Highlands, and I believe it transfers over to you as ACE instructors, we have the ability to, we have autonomy in those instances to determine that in a lot of ways. Oh, that's okay. I just saw there was a message in the chat. More than okay. So yeah, we're talking the student did not follow any formatting guidelines in this and made numerous serious errors in grammar, punctuation, and spelling. I think as an overview of the grading criteria here, right, just in general, that we're looking for college level work, right, that no matter what setting they're in, and I think this is especially imperative in first year writing classes, and I think in the setting that a lot of you are in, where you're giving them this college level education, but they're still in a high school setting, that it's really imperative that we grade them at a college level, that we show them what this is going to be like. And with our grading, I think we can do a lot of really good teaching as instructors, as English instructors especially. And I think that's something that is often overlooked about our discipline. And I don't know if any of you can agree with that, but I know that I do a lot of teaching with my grading. I do a lot of teaching in the classroom, but I do a lot of teaching with my grading as well. And I think it's a practice that often gets overlooked and maybe gets reduced to just some numbers on a rubric sometimes. But we need to remember as English instructors, this is where a lot of our heavy lifting happens, because each student has their own problems and each students are going to fall variably on this sort of spectrum that I've laid out here for you. And some of them may have A-level content and B-level mechanics. And so it's up to us to even those out and sort of get that stuff in line, so that way they can have a fully functioning like ASA. And I think we do a lot of that heavy lifting with our grading, more so than some other disciplines, at least in conversations that I've had with other people and with my English colleagues here at Penn Highlands. I think we are often in agreement that grading essays is often one of the most difficult things that any teacher can do, right? Because there's a lot of, I don't mean to say a lot of subjectivity, but I think there is a lot of subjectivity in it. And by having a strong foundation like this, we can avoid some of that subjectivity as much as we can, and make sure that we're giving students the level of education they need to succeed as they enter that new adventure of college. So yeah, that's done with grading criteria now at this point. We'll open it up for questions at the end of this. If anybody has any specific questions for me about any of these, you can please hold and ask those later at the end here. But moving forward then, the next thing on our agenda was assessment. This concept of assessment being different from grading, right? And in this, in at least in our conversation, it's going to be, right? It's going to be in different terms. When you're assessing, I think we oftentimes will use these terms interchangeably sort of in the classroom, maybe, that you're trying to assess these students' learning outcomes. But I think when we're talking here bigger picture, right? When you go talk grading, you're talking specific essay. You can teach them in that essay, right? But when we talk assessment, we're talking bigger picture. How are they faring at a whole, right? It's almost a holistic sort of looking at your class, not just that one essay that was good and that one essay that was bad. So each academic year, we're going to select specific aspects of the courses to assess, right? And these will often change. I know that sometimes they stay pretty consistent, but they're going to change. And I'm going to open this up here in another minute or two at the end of my discussion of assessment to see if there's any areas that you all might think we would want to look into this year in particular, but we'll see if we have anything to say about that. But each year we're going to pick different things. And this year it's me and Lance Harshberger. Some of you may receive some communication from him. We're the two running the English department here, and I'm doing the ACE. He's our discipline coordinator here, and I believe chair of English here at Penn Highlands. And so you will probably receive some correspondence from him eventually whenever you are working on assessment. So I just wanted to get his name out there so you weren't surprised if it popped up in your email. And so each year you will receive an observation site visit, you will participate in assessment, right? So if you don't receive an observation site visit this year, you won't participate in assessment, you won't get that information from him. But if you do receive an observation site visit, you will participate in assessment. And I visited 2 people so far, and I don't believe they're in the meeting today, but there's still, I got 3 more visits on my docket this semester, and then we've got some more next semester. So I might be seeing some of you in your classrooms eventually. But assessment always relates to one or more of the course outcomes directly from the master syllabus, right? Directly from the master syllabus that you get from us here at Penn Highlands. We'll be looking to ensure that those students, as I said, holistically are meeting one or more of those course outcomes that are coming directly from that document, right? So as I said, the grade you gave the paper does not relate to the assessment, right? Grade refers to the entire paper. Assessment refers to a specific element. For instance, we might look at, I know in the past, we've looked at thesis statements and topic sentences. That essay could be a C essay, but it might have really good thesis still, right? And good topic sentences, but they may have really, as we look through there, they may have a lot of problems with mechanics and maybe style, but they still had a solid content, right? Maybe their content was good, right? And so that could still be a great essay for assessment, because we don't necessarily care about the grade of the paper as a whole. We care about only that specific element of the paper. We're looking at, in these particular areas, did we hit the mark with most of our students, right? Are the majority of the students able to write a cohesive thesis statement by the time they leave this class? I think in 205, I really want to start working on a synthesis as a level of assessment. Are these students able to synthesize their own thoughts and ideas with the thoughts and ideas of others, right? And we might look at that specific element. That's at least something I'm going to suggest this year to look at for that class in particular. But we're just looking at just those small marks and seeing if most of our students were able to hit it. And I always want to reiterate when talking about assessment that it's not about testing your teaching, right? We're not there. We as assessors, as people doing these assessments, as Pennsylvania Highlands, trying to assess whether or not these classes are accomplishing their goals. We are not there to test your teaching. It's about whether or not those concepts were just sufficiently developed, right? We're just trying to see if they were worked on enough. How you teach it is up to you. You have academic freedom in that regard, to the extent that you have it, and how you teach it is in whichever manner you want to, but it's about whether or not they're actually hitting those concepts. 610, I want to keep moving on here. So we will always assess English 110 every semester, and we assess 200 and 205 in the spring. But I do want to reiterate that if your class is a full year class, which I know a lot of them at the high school setting end up being full year, we only want assessment materials when your class concludes. So you'll get, if you're teaching a 110 and it's a full year, you'll still wait until the end of the year to do your assessment materials. And we will contact you with that information if it comes to, when it comes to that. But I just wanted to say that we always try to assess English 110. And I think that's pretty obvious because it's a fundamental gateway class that is going to determine how successful some of these students are going to be at the college level. And then in the spring, we will look at 200 and 205, mostly because multiple sections of those are always offered in the spring, but not always offered in the fall. So with that in mind, I wanted to open it up to you all for a brief second and see if there are any areas that you think might be in need of assessment this year. Are there any areas that you sort of think we should be looking at? Any specific elements that any of you have any as far as suggestions for areas that might be in need of assessment?
I do. So I noticed last year and this year that my students particularly struggle with using an outside source and using it correctly. We had a lot of plagiarism problems last year.
Okay.
So that's something that I've been kind of reiterating in my class this year already, just this idea of how do you use an outside source correctly and give credit to that source.
Okay, so I was going to ask if you're talking about correctness or integrating it, but you're talking correctness, right? Okay, yeah, I think that's a good one. I'm going to write that down as something we might want to look at. So correctly using source material. Awesome. I think that's a great suggestion. I don't know if we've assessed, I don't know if we've assessed that recently, but that's something I definitely would consider looking at. Any other suggestions from the group that we have here? And I will say at the end of this, I will put up my contact info. So if anybody has any, maybe not on the top of your head right now, it's been a long day. I know most of you have taught all day. So if maybe it comes to you tomorrow morning, you can shoot me an email and if there's any areas you wanted to look at. But I always want to, I want to see what areas because you're all in the trenches too and teaching these classes. So I know that you have experience with these students. So I want to see what you all think about these. But we can continue moving on. And like I said,
I wanted to say something about, you were talking about the conclusions.
Yes.
And I'm going to tell you, I teach at Conemaugh Valley High School. And what they are taught in grade school is the easy conclusion. With very simple, easy conclusion, which unfortunately carries its way over to the high school. And my seniors, only maybe 2 of the 17 I have in the honors 12 class, which is the ACE program.
Mm-hmm.
They still do that. That is what I think about da 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 da. And I'm like, oh my God, I had you in 8th grade. I tried to get that out of you. But I think that I'm teaching 7th grade this year and seniors, and I'm seeing it's I'm not faulting the grade school for that, but it is an easy conclusion. And with the text-dependent analysis questions now on the PSSAs, I'm really trying to strangle this out of the kids, not strangle the kids, but I'm really trying to get rid of that, because truly, or like you said before, or they come up with a new topic at the very end or a new idea at the end. It's like, no, make it a memorable conclusion. I have only a couple students, 7th graders, who can do that well. And I have probably from the 17 in my class for Honors 12, I have probably half that can do a really solid, decent conclusion. But yet I have one who says, that is what I think about da-da-da-da-da. That is something we really need to look at that. I mean, I truly feel that that is something that needs further exploration, but I know I'm trying.
I'm with you, Kelly. I see that same thing. And I just want to say that we can commiserate here, because it's making its way to the college level too. Like I'm seeing it in 200. I see students that are doing that still. So they've already been in college for a year. A lot of them, they're sophomores and they're still doing that. So yeah, I think that's something I wrote that down too here as maybe something we could look at with assessment and try to see how students are working on that.
I wanted to add on to what Kelly said about not necessarily, I mean, I see that in conclusions as well. But I've noticed I teach both 110 and the two, I think it's 200. So I have the privilege of having them in 11th and 12th grade.
Okay.
And so, but I've noticed across the board, and my 12th graders are getting much better at this because they got not very good grades from this last year. And so they're doing much better. But the idea of not just summarizing what has been said by others, but giving their own ideas and their own thoughts, they really, really struggled with that, even with different types of text that we looked at. Argumentative, we did an argumentative essay and they still struggled, which that's the whole point of an argumentative essay, is saying what you think without saying I, right? But they had a really hard time taking the information and being able to comment on it. And so I think that's, I don't know if anyone else is seeing that, but especially in the 200 level English, it's important to be able to do that. That's like the whole point of literary analysis, right? So that's something that I've been noticing in my classes, and I'm sure that that's a common thing too.
I think if I could add on to that, I think that a lot of the students that I'm currently teaching, they went through both 10th and 11th grades and also 8th grade with the same teacher, who always told them that he didn't care what their opinion was, and that if it wasn't his opinion, it was not worth the time. Now he's going to retire this year, okay? But he's also our department chair. But anyway, that is what they were told. So whenever I'm asking them to give me your opinion without saying, in my opinion, but in not using I think this or I think that, they're afraid to do that. They just don't know how to give their opinions. They really don't. And as a result, it makes the analysis product so very weakened, because you don't have, there's nothing to back them up. They flounder.
And I think this is actually a good transition into the next discussion I'm getting into here, because I think one of the things we often, at least a new way that I've heard writing across the curriculum talked about, which we're getting to here, is my third point on this, that it actually can help instill some of that confidence. And I think to what Kelly is talking about here, and I apologize, I didn't catch the other person's, G. Monroe.
Sorry, Grace. Yeah.
Grace. All right. Sorry. And what Grace is referring to here as well, thank you both for speaking up about that, because I think you're both spot on, is this lack of confidence in them a lot of the times too, right? That our students struggle with writing, and that I think a lot of them are afraid to take that firm stance because they're afraid their opinion might be wrong. And I think a lot of the time we need to teach them and instill in them that, like, I don't know, that I always talk about big T truth and little T truth, right? Like that they can take an opinion on an issue and subjectively argue it, to a little t truth, right? That it's true as far as within the context of this essay, that they have supported it well enough within the context of this essay that it's true, versus big T truth being like universal objective truths, right? Like the sun is hot, and there's no way to disprove that, right? So I always try to take that approach in one way to really start helping them understand that they're not writing an objective truth here, right? That they're writing an argument, and an argument isn't about who's the loudest shouter in the room or the most eloquent person in the room, but it's about logic and reason and supporting it with these things. And I think writing across the curriculum, and especially some of these new ways that I want to talk about it with you here over the next couple of minutes here before we finish up, can really help us with that, right? And so generally, writing across the curriculum refers to the following, right? This creating a culture of writing at your school, right? When everyone at your institution buys into the cross-disciplinary need for good writing and communication skills. In an ideal world, that'd be awesome, right? It's also about professional development in a lot of ways, right? Because students will need to be able to write effectively no matter what professional field they aspire to enter into, right? So writing across the curriculum actually helps them develop these professional skills. And when we get to ways that I'm actually trying to combat the problems with WAC, that's one of the ways I do is try to instill in them that these are professional skills, right? This isn't just we're not just in here reading literature and writing about it just to write about literature. I'm teaching you some skills that are going to be transferable no matter what field you end up going into. And in that way, it can also help instill that confidence, right, in a lot of ways between them. And I think writing across the curriculum is a way for us to help bridge the gap between what they already know and that process of writing. Just a quick anecdote here. I taught a class, when was it, 2 years ago now here. Yeah, it was 3 years ago, right before the pandemic here at Penn Highlands, where it was the EUT program, which is the Electrician Utility Technician program here, where we have a lot of gentlemen, I will say gentlemen because it was primarily a male class, but a lot of people that already are working for Penn Elec will come here and take classes towards their associate's degree. And so this class was full of people. I often, in my Comp 1 class on the first week, will talk about, so like what's a good piece of writing look like? What's the best piece of writing that you've read in a long time? And this guy sticks out to me from that class who said to me, "I don't read, Mr. Stumpf." And I said, "What do you mean you don't read? Because you definitely do. I bet you do." I was like, "What was the last sort of thing you picked up and looked at?" And he was like, "It was a hunting magazine of some kind." And he said that he looks at that. And I was like, "Well, then you read, sir. What do you actually do within that magazine?" And then, you know what? The rest of the semester, he wrote me some great essays about like wildlife conservation, about like culling the herd of deer. And so I was able to, I think in a way there, was able to bridge the gap between what he already knew and this process of writing, because they're often scared of this process of writing, that it's some intellectual challenge, which I think in a lot of ways it is, but I think we need to instill in them that they can gap that what they already know matters, what they already know actually is important. WAC also often refers to this writing plans and general education plans of implementing writing assignments in non-English courses. However, it's more than that, right? It's way more than that. Having a bio teacher teaching them how to write a lab report isn't necessarily writing across the curriculum, right? They're not instilling the same things that we're trying to in an English classroom. And it also refers to this decentered pedagogy, right? That we're moving away from simple lecture modes of teaching and incorporating active student engagement within our classrooms, getting them to write. I have my students do a lot of writing in the classroom, and then they talk about that process with us. And I also like to break down that writing is a lot of things. It's not just composing, the sitting down at a keyboard. I really try to break that into two separate processes with them, is that writing is more. Sitting down to put your fingers on the keyboard is the composition process. That's when you're actually putting words on the screen. That's not writing. Writing is a lot of the work that comes before that, right? Writing is the planning, the talking about it, the articulating things, the research. That's all writing. So major issues within WAC, right? Getting faculty and departments outside of English to teach this, right? This is the struggle with WAC. It's always been, right? It's difficult to get disciplinary faculty outside of English classes to teach and commit to writing, right? A lot of it, at least at the college level, large class sizes, they don't have the ability to do so. Some of them have lack of training in writing, so they're not comfortable even implementing writing assignments. And then some of them sheerly just don't see the value in it in a lot of ways. This is a problem, right? And I'm going to talk here in a second about how we can sort of combat that. Another issue is that writing assessment across campus, right? Many faculty don't like being assessed, as we just talked about, because a lot of people see it as an indictment of their teaching whenever it's not, right? They see it as encroaching on their academic freedom, and it's not. We really just want to get these ideas to our students. Another issue is it often falls on the shoulders of us as English instructors, right? No matter what, the teaching of writing about everything and anything falls on the shoulders of the English instructor. Part of that, I think, might be a good thing. We've got some job security, but otherwise, it's a lot that falls on our shoulders as English instructors, that we're expected to teach them how to write. Every genre of writing under the sun in one way or another is something for us to teach. And then often it's not sustainable, right? It's usually built on the strength of 1 to 2 people with a passion for communication, right? And if any of those people retire or leave or what have you, it puts the sustainability of any sort of writing across the curriculum program in jeopardy. So combating these issues, we'll get through these here. Getting faculty and departments outside of English to teach the value. It's imperative that we as writing instructors speak and plead with our colleagues about the value of writing in every discipline and get them to buy in, right? We need reinforcement from our colleagues in other classrooms that writing is imperative, that it's important, that it, even if they want to go get an MBA, or if they want to go work in construction, or whatever they want to do with their lives, no matter what they want to do with their lives, writing is going to play an important role, and communication is also going to play an important role. And being able to do this effectively is going to help them a lot. Writing assessment on campus, this is not an easy one to overcome, right? And I think the only way to do this is to do the same as above, right? Is to talk to our colleagues and get them to buy in to letting even us as English instructors. I know that's more work falling on our shoulders, right? But going in and seeing how they're actually implementing writing instruction within other classrooms, so that students can see the importance of what we're teaching them when they enter that biology classroom, or even that math classroom. Or I have a colleague here who I believe does some good work and even implements some writing into their math classroom. The falling on the shoulders of the English instructor, like I said, I think the only way that we can combat this is to sort of lean into it, right? This is the hand that we've been dealt as teachers of English, that if we can instill the value of writing into our students, maybe they'll go on to understand its importance in other disciplines. And I think this falls on our shoulders, but there's nothing we can really do about that at this stage. And I think that at this point, these are some of the new conversations that I've heard going on with WAC, is that we should lean into it. This is going to allow us to have more of an impact on these students by allowing us to teach these different things. And then sustainability is another one issue to overcome. And again, I think passionate discourse about the ever-growing importance of this understanding of good communication and rhetoric is one of the ways that I've found others to get on board when I've talked to colleagues of mine across a couple different campuses that I've taught at now. I find that just talking to them about how important this is, like tell them to turn on the TV for one night, and then they can see how important it is for us to have good communication and rhetorical skills. So in summary, college grading practices are important for imparting in our students a sense of academic rigor, right? I think it's up to us also as English instructors to impart in them the importance of this with that level of rigor, right? Assessment differs from grading in our context and focuses on specific elements of student writing, right? It's not an indictment of your teaching, right? We're not looking to, we don't, frankly, as ACE people, all I care is that they're getting the right material, right? However you teach it to them is up to you, right? You have that academic freedom. And our understanding of WAC must shift, right? Due to our realities of our role as writing instructors, right? We are going to, I think, over the next few years, I think more is going to end up being piled on our shoulders as writing instructors. And I know that might sound scary, and I think, but I think it's something that I think we have to take on at this stage and be able to do this as writing instructors and help our students succeed no matter what their future wants to be. I know that I have very much changed my approach in some of my classes where I used to have them. I remember when I first started teaching Comp 1, and I'm not that old, so it hasn't been that long. I've been teaching for 7 years now. But I don't know, when I first started teaching Comp 1, I was very green, and I felt comfortable with literature because that's what I do, right? And so I did a lot of literature in that class, and now I would never dream of that, right? That didn't help those students. It helped them, but it wasn't as successful in helping them as what I do now, where I'm writing across the curriculum in a Comp 1. I let them write about all sorts of different things, all sorts of different fields, whatever they're actually getting into and however it's going to help them. So 2 more questions for you all before we call it a night here, and then I'll open it up to you to ask me some questions. But I said, first, does anyone have any ideas about maybe what should the content of first year writing courses include that it doesn't already? And I think we were talking maybe some things there about correctly using source material and maybe going into conclusions some more. And then on top of that, how can we better prepare our students for the rest of their college level coursework? Is there any ideas on these areas from any of you at the moment? And again, I'll give you my contact information at the end here if anybody has anything that pops up after our discussion here today.
I do have one thing that I'd like to look at in my first year writing courses. As my students are leaving high school and going to college, we're using MLA in this course, but I feel like they need some more exposure to the other writing styles because they're going to have to use those formats for some of their other classes.
I agree with you completely. Yes, I've started just covering APA in my Comp 1 class just because it's extra work for me, and I know that, but I've just started doing it because I've had students who have left my Comp 1 class and then come back to me in my office and been like, hey, what's this other style that my other professor wants me to use now? And so, yeah, I'm with you on that. I think that we might want to consider adding that as something in the Comp 1 courses to cover APA, at least touch on it. Because I've had students that are like, what is this, when they see an APA assignment and they get kind of freaked out by it.
Well, next week, we're going to start getting into like, what are each of those pieces in the MLA? And so it feels like if I can teach that well in March or April, dabble into APA and show them how they're very similar. And like, but if you know those base components, then you can use them in the style that's needed.
Absolutely. I think that's a good idea. Yeah. And something that I'm with you in shoehorning that into a Comp 1 wherever you can is definitely worthwhile.
I might be totally off right now, but isn't an introduction to APA part of the master syllabus now?
Let me double check. I can double check on that, but I don't believe
I mean,
so.
I don't know. I've been teaching this class for about probably 10 years now, and I've always not, I mean, no mastery of it, but just a very brief intro to APA. Usually, hit it towards April or May there. But I, for some reason, I thought that it was on the master syllabus now, that there's supposed to be a brief introduction to APA, but maybe I'm wrong. I don't know.
I will double check on that for you. I'm intrigued to look. I mean, I just looked at the master syllabus earlier. I don't think it's on there, but I will double check. I want to double check on that. But yeah, because I think it is absolutely necessary and something that we should consider adding into the first year writing course that it doesn't include. Even if it does include already, maybe we should highlight it some more and bring it up on that levels of what's needed to be taught in that class. And I think that also answers question 2. I think too, teaching them some more APA will help them better prepare for their college level coursework. Awesome. I know we've been here for a while now, so I want to go ahead and we can, if anything else comes up, again, I'm going to have my contact information up here for you. But then I wanted to open up, are there any questions from any of you for me at the moment that I might be able to help you with, or at least give some insight into, or at least steer you in the right direction to find the answer maybe?
I had a quick question, and maybe this is something that I can email you about, but I'm teaching the 200 level course this year, and that's new to me. And I haven't seen any like I know for Comp 1, there's a ton of rubrics on the course information. There's a bunch of stuff, but I haven't found anything. Like I kind of dug around a little bit the other day, and I didn't see anything for this course, and I didn't know if there is anything. That's okay if there's not. I can, but I want to make sure I wasn't missing anything with that. Other than the course like master syllabus. I couldn't find anything, especially for that final assessment. And again, if not, that's okay. But I just want to make sure I wasn't. These 2 courses this year. Last year is my first year teaching the Comp 1 course, and they gave me both of them this year.
Okay.
So yeah.
Yeah, I think you're correct. There's not much there, but I will, again, that's something else I will double check on. I think a lot of it is because the 200 is a lot more free in a lot of ways than the Comp 1 is. but there's still definitely standards that you have to meet and assessment levels that you should be striving for. But I'll double check on that too for you, and I can see if I can find any more information on any materials for 200. But I think you're correct in that there might not be much there. Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you.
You're welcome. Anybody else? We're all ready to call it an evening, and that's okay. I'll go ahead and put up my information here. That's my office phone number. You can even text it. We have this awesome new system here now that's Ring Central. So if you text my office number, it actually gets forwarded to my cell phone, which is awesome. I've actually started to give my students that. I've gotten texts from students, which has actually been cool, but it's not my personal number. But my email, mstumpf2@Penn Highlands. You can email me any questions or concerns that come up as you're teaching this, and I've got a couple things. I want to look at whether APA is on the Comp 1 syllabus and look into those 200 materials for you, for a couple of you. But otherwise, I'm about done.
APA is on the Comp 1 syllabus. I just looked.
Okay.
Just as a basic understanding of APA, that's all it says.
Okay. Thank you for looking at that. I appreciate that, Jessica. So I will note that maybe we should highlight that some more, or maybe even I'll talk with my colleagues here about what maybe we could do about that. Awesome. I appreciate you all.
One more question, if that's okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
Something that I've been very nervous the past couple of years to really get too in depth on, and kind of wanting to know how it's handled at the college level, is your good old classic grammar mechanical skill of pronoun antecedent agreement. And I see some smiles. I know there's, the traditional way. I know there's the new way, and just not really sure what we are looking for in formal writing for correctness, and what is, what the higher level English gods are saying is appropriate and not appropriate.
I'm not sure I have an answer to that at the moment. Anyway, any of those with smiles have any comments on that?
I asked last year in this kind of thing about meta discourse, which I'm assuming that's kind of what we're talking about. And I got like no answer. And I've just been kind of letting my students do that. I just finished my master's program 2 years ago at Bucknell, and they were pretty much like, all the younger professors said, yes, use it. And all of the very old fashioned professors said no. So I just made sure to tell my students, I'm accepting this. This may not be acceptable for your professor in college. So if you choose to do English in college, ask first. And so that's kind of what I've been telling them, but I would definitely like to know for sure if that's something that I should kind of backtrack on or not.
Okay, because I know personally it's something I don't mark that at the college level. But I mean, I'm that younger professor that you're talking about too here. So I think there's a difference there. So I can again look into that some more. And
yeah, and I just asked because it's on the master syllabus for English 110 as one of the concepts that we're supposed to talk about. I mean, it's written as pronoun antecedent agreement. So obviously I want to know how, what should be the right way to teach that. And I usually tell the students, casual conversation, not really a big deal, but usually in formal writing, kind of like that pronoun to agree with its antecedent as singular to singular, plural to plural, unless somebody's going with that pronoun of they. But I don't know if that's the right thing to do or not.
Okay, yeah, I think that's an interesting question, and I think maybe just part of the evolution of language that we're experiencing in our current times right now also, because I mean, English isn't stagnant. It's a language that is ever growing and changing and adapting and evolving. So yeah, I think that's interesting and something that maybe we could consider to look at, and I can try to get you some answers. Who was that was asking that?
Sorry, my name is Clarissa.
Oh,
I just have
Clarissa,
my screen turned off. So I got a dog running in the background. My daughter's running around, and just 80 million people running around.
So, all right, I am also intrigued by that. So I also want to get some answers. So I think that's a really good question. And I think it speaks to what I was just saying there with English. English is evolving right now before our eyes in a lot of ways. So it's something that I'll look into and try to get you some answers, Clarissa.
Thank you.
Awesome. anything else before we call it an evening? Alrighty, well, if you haven't yet, you could write down my contact info here and you can reach out with any other questions or concerns that you may have as they arise. I hope I will probably be seeing some of you next semester. I'm not sure who has site visits scheduled for next semester yet. They haven't given me that information yet. I only know for this semester, but I might be seeing some of you next semester. But until I see you at your site visits or until next year's discipline meeting, I hope you enjoy yourselves and happy teaching to everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. You have a great day.
You too. Thank you all so much. I appreciate you showing up for this.